Hi, everyone. Welcome to the James Beard Foundation Industry Support webinar. This one is on the Community Meals Fund, valuing restaurant and nonprofit partnerships during COVID-19. My name is Ashley Kosiak, and I am an Impact Program Manager here at the James Beard Foundation. And I'm very happy to be with you today talking about this really important piece of legislation. If you haven't seen it, you're welcome to Google it. It's Community Meals Fund. Also, the kind of more official name for it is HR 6384. So that is going to be the topic of today's conversation. Before I introduce our panelists today, I'm going to review some of the, kind of logistics of this webinar. If you've joined us before, this is all old news to you. So how the webinar works, first off, this webinar is being recorded. A recording of it will be available about 24 hours after we wrap today. So at about this time tomorrow, this webinar will be available on the James Beard Foundation site, probably where you registered for this. If you can't remember where that is or need help finding it, you can always Google JBF Industry Webinars. The website itself is jamesbeard.org/industry/support/webinars, but also just head to the JBF site or go ahead and Google JBF Industry Webinar. So this is being recorded and will be available later. We will save most of the questions for the end. So if you have any questions, as you're looking at the screen of your computer on the right-hand side, you'll notice there's like a little question box, a little question button, like a little dialog box. You can type those in and that'll be sent to myself and my colleague Elk, who is also assisting on this webinar. So that's great for any questions that you might have for our panelists. It's also great if you're running into any technical difficulties. Elk and I will do our best to troubleshoot, but unfortunately we're not GoToWebinar, IT folks. We'll do our best to help. So if you are running into any technical difficulties, just let Elk and I know and we'll try to help. So that's those. So this is going to be pretty much a casual conversation between friends. This is for educational purposes. Nothing in this webinar should be, construed as any legal or business advice. It's really just a nice conversation between some really intelligent folks, and I'm very, very happy to have them with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and start by introducing our webinar panelists. So first we have, I'm just going to go from left to right as you see folks on your screen. So first we have Jenny Dirksen from Share Our Strength. We're also joined by Monica Garay from the Office of Representative Nydia and Velázquez, who's the Congresswoman from the 7th Congressional District in New York. So if you live in parts of Brooklyn or parts of the Lower East Side, Congresswoman Velázquez might be your representative. So we're really happy to have Monica with us today from her office. And finally, we're joined by Chef Alex Raij. Alex is an amazing chef who's been through our Chef Bootcamp program. She's actually one of Congresswoman Velázquez's constituents, and she has several restaurants in the New York City and Brooklyn area, including Txikito, Quinto, Pino, and Vara. So we're really excited to have these three folks with us here today. So I'm just gonna dive into the questions. And Monica, I'm gonna start with you. Could you, explain for us in layman's terms, I'm not in DC, a lot of the listeners aren't in DC, don't understand the necessary legal, political language, the policy language around the Community Meals Fund or HR 6384. Could you explain for us what exactly is in the bill?
Absolutely, happy to do so. So in short, the Community Meals Fund, HR 6384, is a grant program that will allow community-based anti-hunger nonprofits to receive up to $500,000 to partner with small and mid-sized restaurants to help bolster food security in vulnerable populations. And how do we expect them to do that? We expect to provide access to consistent meals with vulnerable and low-income communities, bolster security with target populations, mobilize restaurant workers through this public-private partnership, and importantly, expand the capacity of agencies, community partners, and small restaurants to meet the needs of kids, families, and populations who are in most need at this moment. So thank you all for your interest, and I'm happy to answer any more questions about the bill later today.
Great. So it sounds like it is predominantly, it's funds for nonprofit and restaurant partnerships to help feed those most in need.
Correct.
So, New York, in the pandemic has obviously affected communities across the country, restaurants across the country, but New York was particularly, I feel, hard hit. As chairwoman, so Representative Velázquez is chairwoman of the Small Business Committee, and of course her constituents are in New York. So constituents and small businesses in her constituency have been hit really hard by this pandemic, including restaurants. So what is your office seeing in the 7th District, and what inspired the representative to introduce this bill?
Absolutely. Our team has been working around the clock with small businesses, hospitals, nonprofits, school agencies, etc. We have specifically seen restaurants in the Lower East Side, Sunset Park, Williamsburg, and Queens shutter due to COVID-19. As you all know, we're living in unprecedented and unplanned times where the restaurant industry is suffering across the nation, especially in food-focused areas like New York City, where the industry employs over 300,000 people. While stay-at-home orders are vital to flatten the curve and protect our public health, we want to make sure that at the end of this pandemic, restaurants come out on the other side empowered to move forward and not shut down operations indefinitely. Before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, anti-hunger groups were struggling to meet the needs of an estimated 37 million Americans who routinely struggle with hunger, a number that unfortunately is rising due to an increase in unemployment and poverty rates, two strong drivers of food insecurity. Recently, the New York Times announced that over 40 million Americans have filed for unemployment, and economic advisor Kevin Hassett projects unemployment can hit 20% by June, which means that more people are likely to rely on food assistance. Additionally, there are gaps in meal coverage as we know it, especially for children and adults. The coronavirus has exposed gaps in our safety net services. For example, while the USDA school meals program is critical in feeding children, we need to expand their coverage into weekends too. While the federal government recently passed pandemic SNAP benefits for children totaling $420 per eligible child, those funds are only designed to make up meals during the times children were supposed to be in school. This crisis shows us that we need a resilient strategy so that people can get freshly prepared meals. Plus, recently we have seen large crowds and lines form outside of food pantries hours before they're even set to open. Anti-hunger nonprofits need manpower to help aid in preparation, storage, and delivery of meals to the communities that they serve. Restaurants can provide this vital assistance through the partnership established in HR 6384. Given the makeup of our district, the Congresswoman has always been an advocate in ensuring that kids and families are food secure. She understands the connection to how HR 6384 can help communities. Simply put, when families thrive, our communities thrive. We had an ongoing relationship with Share Our Strength, and when they presented this concept to our office, we strategized on how to best serve communities experiencing food insecurity. Seeing how restaurants were already stepping up to feed our neighborhoods, we wanted to build on the ongoing partnerships we were seeing across the country. HR 6384 strengthens this partnership between two groups who know best how to take care of their communities, and we are confident that it will bolster food security during the COVID-19 pandemic. It has been great working with Share Our Strength and the James Beard Foundation, and we appreciate the work that many of you are doing to give back to your communities during this challenging time. Thank you for that question.
Great, thank you, and thank you for joining us today. Jenny, I'm going to pivot to you. Could you first talk a little bit about Share Our Strength? I think a lot of the folks on this webinar are probably very familiar with Share Our Strength, but in case they're not, if you could talk a little bit about what Share Our Strength does and what your role within Share Our Strength is.
Absolutely. Share Our Strength is a national nonprofit that was founded in 1984, actually as a response to the Ethiopian famine. No small mission, just ending hunger and poverty globally. But in 2010, we really drilled in on something that we knew was achievable, which was ending domestic childhood hunger. We were getting much closer. We have actually backslid to where we were in 2010 right now, with a potential 1 in 4 kids facing hunger. But so the No Kid Hungry campaign is really our biggest forward-facing campaign. We also have a nutrition education campaign called Cooking Matters. My work, I've been with the organization for 10 years since the launch of No Kid Hungry. And now I have this amazing role where I can elevate voices we call champions for our work, Alex among them, many of the listeners today, I'm sure, among them. We focus primarily on chefs, although my team does also engage celebrities. But with chefs, we're specifically focused on fundraising. They've been incredible supporters of ours for fundraising events for 30 plus years, but also and especially advocacy and raising awareness. Chefs are so well recognized in their communities, and we find there's a lot of shared values between chefs and their guests, chefs and their employees. And so elevating voices of people who work with food daily around issues of hunger.
Great. And so you said that we've actually backslid in terms of childhood hunger since then. I would love to learn how else, kind of the work you do, and especially with the chef community, has changed since, January 15th, February 1st of this year. How has it changed since the COVID pandemic?
When everyone's closures took place in mid-March, I was so struck that the two communities most severely impacted were the two communities my team helps to bring together. So school kids and culinary professionals, and schools were closed and restaurants were closed. So it's really been, I think, a little bit of the bottom falling out in terms of how we've done what we do, and yet the interest has not stopped. Folks, again, who are on this call may have shuttered their businesses or pivoted to delivery takeout, pivoted to serving frontline workers, but we're still hearing from them saying, do you understand, if schools are closed, and now everyone understands, front page of the New York Times yesterday, that kids actually do rely on schools for meals, and now they're going hungry. We're still hearing from our chefs that they want to do what they can to help, even amongst the many other things that they're balancing. So a lot of it is going back to what we know best, advocacy, sending this sign-on letter around with the James Beard Foundation. And if anyone hasn't signed, I think there's still the opportunity for them to do that. But we have over 400 signatures there. Of that, more than 60% of the signees are doing some kind of community feeding right now. So again, it's like, the more it changes, the more the qualities we've always recognized in the restaurant industry are just finding ways to express themselves, so the pathways are different.
Great. And so speaking of the impact this has had on the restaurant industry, I want to turn to you, Alex, Chef Alex. You have multiple restaurants in the New York City area. I would love to learn how this pandemic has affected your business, and also, inspired a decision to do a community meals program. I know you're working with World Central Kitchen, but how has your business changed? How have you been impacted, and what really inspired that decision?
Well, for starters, all of our businesses are closed in the sense that they operated before. We closed them on the 16th, 17th of March. They were closed by executive order, but we were already, we went to 50% as soon as we started to understand what was happening. And then it would be like 20 minutes later, it'd be like, you're down to 50%. And so I think we were all thinking alike. We really wanted to serve people safely and to keep our staff safe. And it was clear that we weren't going to be able to do that even before the executive order came down. So we closed, and as people were saying now, we hit pause. But it's been a much longer pause than we anticipated. And in the meantime, we tried to put together some strategies for what it might look like for us to open when it's possible. Just create a fund for our employees who are the most vulnerable, and get money to them as quickly as possible, which I'm so grateful to our sort of customer community that we were able to do that. And then we just sort of started chipping away at step by step what we could be doing. We did not have certain relationships to start doing relief meals immediately that some of our colleagues had, but we started to reach out as quickly as we could to see what we could do. And so we've been having very limited staff producing meals with World Central Kitchen and Brooklyn Cares out of one of our shops, and really motivated by making sure that we could provide something delicious and nutritious to frontline workers, and then also giving an opportunity for our staff to get a paycheck, and also provide certain like community service, which they are really thrilled to be able to do as well.
That's great. Thank
it's been
you.
A great experience. Yeah.
So Monica, I'm gonna go back to you for a second there. You know, as Alex spoke, so many restaurants are going through something similar to what Alex's restaurants are going through to greater or lesser degrees. I know some across the country might be starting to reopen now, some might be doing delivery, takeout, but some really do want to play a key role in helping to feed people or have past experience, you know, with that sort of feeding communities. How can restaurants who have experience and skills of feeding people, how can they play a role in these nonprofit restaurant partnerships? Because there are some really innovative partnerships that we're seeing that are really addressing feeding vulnerable populations during the pandemic.
Absolutely. I think now more than ever, restaurants can play an integral role with their expertise in procuring food, repurposing commercial kitchens, cooking for scale, and delivering meals. Restaurants already also have a successful delivery mechanism that they can employ to help deliver food to hard-to-reach rural areas, families experiencing homelessness, senior citizens, which we see a spike in needing assistance, and importantly, areas where school districts have suspended meal distribution for reasons related to COVID-19. Restaurants most definitely can play an essential role in helping those most impacted by this crisis, and we've witnessed that in prior hurricanes and even now during COVID-19, as you mentioned. And in a time where volunteers are less likely to show up for safety reasons, restaurants have stepped up and they are involved in very important anti-hunger causes. They also play an integral role in partnering with anti-hunger nonprofits, and through this, they can make a difference in the lives of children and vulnerable populations in their communities.
Great. And Jenny, kind of building off of that, you know, you do a lot of work with chefs. As Monica just mentioned, chefs have been involved with these sort of partnerships for quite some time, especially when it comes to issues around food, particularly, you know, feeding hungry kids, the elderly, SNAP, public charge. What do you think the unique strengths are that chefs and culinary professionals really bring to this particular type of policy and advocacy?
I think when it comes to policy and advocacy, chefs are just not the usual suspects showing up in state houses or on Capitol Hill. They're influential members of their communities, they're employers, they're business owners. They have established roots in these districts, and so their voice and messages really matter deeply to their elected officials. And no one understands the power of food more than those who work with it for their livelihood. So that point of view, I think, is really valued. In large part because of Chef Action Network and the Beard Boot Camps, and in small part to the trainings we've done very specifically around childhood hunger, I think chefs have really expanded their influence and become community leaders, political leaders, kind of hopefully with a little less politics, but bringing people together again over these shared values. So this is something that we recognize at No Kid Hungry. We're focused on problem solving, and one of the best ways to get there is through advocacy and education, and culinary professionals are a great voice to use there.
Thank you. That's great. And Alex, you've been through our Chef's Boot Camp program. Do you have some experience or some words of advice for other chefs who might want to get more involved with policy and advocacy work, or just sharing some past experiences of your own?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just on a completely positive level, I've met some of the most interesting and talented people that I encountered in my life through this type of work. And it really blows open your world because you get to deal with people who have expertise that's different from your own, and then also understand your impact in a way that you might not have understood it before. So it's actually really exciting work in addition to really important work. And then I would say, I think that building in service into the workplace, and then also showcasing that for children especially, it's like modeling behavior for them. So I think that over time, you know, children will also know that service is a part of their life going forward, and that they are going to need to become advocates and participate in life, like in a civic way, whatever their chosen profession is. I mean, in my case, it's food, and I think it's a privilege to be able to do this work, not just right now, but always. And my restaurants are very, very small, and the reason that we're producing the relief meals out of Chelsea right now is because it's really the biggest restaurant. But my background was in consulting before I opened my own small places. And one of the things that I did was set up like a commissary kitchen for a small restaurant that had a bunch of like little satellite stores. So we have systems, and we know how to make a lot of food in a small place, keep it safe, and make sure that it's like delicious and nutritious. And I mean, I just adding to that, I think that's like a really key component too, is making sure that there's dignity in making these meals, and also dignity in receiving these meals. That they should be really special, and that they should be made with care and attention. And then on the educational side, I've just really appreciated getting to understand how you bake in these benefits into policy, and make sure that even through all the compromises, that there is that there's the possibility for protecting our farmers and protecting their ability to produce nutritious food that doesn't harm the environment. I think what this moment has shown us is just how vulnerable we all are. Not just, we are as vulnerable as our most vulnerable people.
Absolutely. So I have kind of a question that applies to both you, Jenny, and you, Alex, just from different perspectives, from the nonprofit perspective and from the restaurant perspective, because so many of the attendees on these webinars work with nonprofits, or part of nonprofits, or are chefs, are restaurant owners. I would love to ask each of you, Jenny and then Alex, to talk a little bit of, how do these nonprofit restaurant partnerships, how do they logistically play out for each of you, recognizing that, you have different partnerships with different restaurants and nonprofits, but just an overview of kind of like, what does this look like? And maybe not the day-to-day, but, maybe the week-to-week. Jenny, if I could start with you.
Yeah, for this kind of public-private partnership and engaging in communities, we have 2 pilots that we're working on right now, both for our early childhood work. So looking at families that are receiving medically tailored meals, right? There are important health outcomes, diabetes, other things, who also have kids in the house under 5. So one of these is in East DC, the other is in the Palm Beach area. As we get them on board, it's been amazing to me. I've had a lot of conversations with chefs along these lines, sort of, what are you doing? How are you packing it out? It's stunning to me. Again, just kind of like any restaurant operation, large or small, the same issues are bubbling up. A lot of the same solutions are presenting themselves. So a lot of it is truly hammering down how much food is going to be delivered and at what cadence. What is the storage like in any of these households? Do they have a full-size refrigerator? Is there a microwave? Is there an oven? How will they reheat the meals? Are they well labeled? Are they culturally appropriate? And then it's really things like, how long did it take the delivery service to get out there and get the meals? Did we communicate well so that folks knew when they were receiving them? As far as the sort of how we get about it and feedback mechanism, we just have weekly phone calls, and because we're working with chefs, it's a lot of texting, and we're making sure that we're keeping up with each little detail, just as you would in a kitchen. If there were a bump in service during the evening, you'd want to address it so it wasn't recurring. Same thing in these cases. And bizarrely, I think at the end of last year, any of us would have said, what's the biggest threat to restaurants? I mean, delivery is going to destroy dining rooms. And here in some cases, right, delivery might end up rescuing things. So it's the same when we're feeding communities.
And how the restaurants that you're working with, that you're piloting this with, did they come to you and say, hey, we have this idea, or did you reach out to them? How did that relationship develop?
So one is with Eric Bruner Yang in DC, who has Power of 10, which is its own model for helping restaurants to do this. And this was a pilot we had set up before all of this happened. But our food partner at the time, another nonprofit in DC that focuses on homebound, really was at capacity just serving their regular clientele. So I reached out to Eric to say, is this something you might do? I think very much like some other models that are popping up, he's also trying to get other businesses open, bringing them into these efforts. So he's spun on a dime, and they're delivering these medically tailored meals to families with young children in ECC. In Palm Beach, our Zach Bell and Clay Conley, who've been incredible supporters of ours for a long time, they sprung into action. They had already been really engaged with anti-hunger nonprofits in their area, realized the extreme need, and made the bold move to take one of their restaurants and flip it into a packing facility. And they're actually delivering thousands of meals a week right now.
Wow. And Alex, what does this look like for your business on a day-to-day, week-to-week, this feeding your community like this?
Well, I mean, like I said, it's just the one location that we're doing it out of, but it's been a lifeline to the staff that work there, and it's also allowed them to work safely because with a sort of skeleton crew, they can work they can practice distancing, but also produce these meals, and having somebody else take care of like the fulfillment aspect has been really helpful because that's just like wasn't a skill that we had. Like, again, we know how to make food, we know how to make it tasty, we know how to make it in quantity, but we don't know how to, and we could get it to the table, but we couldn't get it out the door. And so it's been really, it's been a learning curve, and it's also been a joy to watch how few mistakes there really have been. I mean, when they tell us they're going to be there at 11 o'clock, they're there at 11 o'clock. Like, we've been working with this very homegrown group called Brooklyn Cares, and just these two moms put together this fund. They're ordering food for frontline workers every week, just from all their favorite restaurants, just trying to like spread the love a little bit. And they come and pick them up themselves, or they send their husbands, and they go straight to Bellevue. And they've chosen hospitals that are like specifically in like really hard hit areas to make sure that they're not, sort of going to these hospitals that are also shells of what they used to be, right? That they're going straight to sort of the eye of the storm, so to speak. But I would love to get involved in a lot of, obviously all those people and those frontline workers have families, but I would love to get involved in making meals for kids. I'm quite well versed in it, and I think it would be really an exciting and great opportunity. And I do think that this is going to be our work for the foreseeable future, and it's good work. All work is good work, and this is especially good work. I mean, we were already doing this on an event basis. It was such a joy to raise money for these great causes by doing these events that we're going to continue to do. And most of those events, we have to do them virtually now. We're like mostly doing like cooking classes or expertise on auction items. But this is one way that we can really directly produce food and use our skill in a way that's not virtual, right? That's like very visceral.
Right. And so, Monica, I'm going to bring it back to you for another, policy question. So we're talking about the Community Meals Fund right now, but we've talked about SNAP and other feeding initiatives. Are there any other important issues regarding, with this community, or regarding food, feeding school kids, feeding anyone? Any policy priorities, any bills that you think people should be paying attention to, even if it's just looking out for it in their local newspaper? What do you think people should be focused on if they care about feeding those who need food in their communities?
Absolutely. First, I would urge your senators to support the HEROES Act. As you know, it passed recently in the House but it has not moved in the Senate yet. And it does have provisions that will bolster provisions for SNAP, EBT, WIC, and that is very important, especially at this moment, that the Senate acts on that vital piece of legislation moving forward. So that is the top line bill that I can think of at the moment. And of course, HR 6384.
Great. And so what is the best way? So you said college senator. Is that the best way for the chefs who are on this, who want to, you know, reach out to their legislators about these, you know, these bills? Should they call them? What's the best way for them to get in touch?
Most definitely. I know most offices, even through teleworking, they are accepting phone calls at this time. Our office, our line is up and running. Most Congress members I know as well in the House. So I do think the best way would be to call. A lot of members also have a system online where you can send a message via email, and they typically get back within 48 hours. So I think that's another great mode of communication. And a lot of telephone town halls have been happening, so just keep an eye out. If you see a telephone town hall happening, they've been surrounding education, small business, nutrition. Keep an eye out, definitely on social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram. They've definitely been utilizing those different vehicles to get the message out to communities. So just keep an eye out. If you have any questions, you can always feel free to email me, and I'm happy to connect people.
Great. And if you're out there and you don't know who your representative is, that's okay. There's a website, find my representative. You can Google it, and I'll try to share a link before this webinar wraps, where you're able to enter your zip code, and if they need more information as well, your street address, and that'll help you identify not just who your representative is, but also provide you with some contact information for them. And if you are interested in, you know, calling them, that'll provide their number. There's also the US, the switchboard, the Capitol switchboard. But if you want to reach out to them on social media, I'll also, before this webinar wraps, try to share out in the chat function. We do have a list of everybody's social media handles. So whether you prefer Twitter or Instagram, whatever your favorite mode of social media is, there is certainly a way to reach out. And Monica, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that they pay attention to these things. You can reach out on social media, and there's someone watching that account.
24/7.
Excellent. So we'll make sure to send that out either after, or I'll try to get it in the chat before this webinar ends. But, you know, Jenny, I'm going to turn to you again. You know, this is, you've worked with restaurants and restaurant management before. This is, you know, certainly a global crisis unlike we've ever seen, but it's also not the first time that restaurants across the country, depending on where you are, you know, 9/11, Katrina, you know, other hurricanes, and restaurants have always stepped up even when under this sort of stress and pressure. You know, why do you think the culinary community is so well suited to play a role in this recovery effort?
Last fall, 700 years ago, last fall, when I was at the Chef Action Network Summit, one of your panelists lovingly referred to those who might catch fish, raise animals, grow produce as providers. Chefs are providers. When we dine out, we're nourished, but we're also nurtured. Chefs are natural caregivers, and in times of crisis, they just leap right in to fill that basic need of food, and through food, providing care, providing love, which is what, right, food is in a lot of ways. So chefs preparing meals for their communities are a lifeline in terms of nutrition and whole human wellness, and that is what I've seen. I was working in restaurants on September 11th, and we opened all of our restaurant doors, and the cooks just started cooking whatever was in the reach-in and the walk-in, knowing that people were going to need food. People needed a place to reconnect and try and process what had happened. After Katrina, I spent a fair amount of time in New Orleans watching nonprofits engage restaurants there, whether it was World Central Kitchen style, a big kettle and under a tent and all the hands on deck, or slowly actually getting restaurants reopened if the physical space was able to handle it, much in the way we saw here after Sandy and through these many storms. This is what chefs do every day. So it makes sense even in times of crisis.
Great. Thank you so much. So I am adding to the chat function. You might have seen it. It's a link to find your representative. And then I'm also going to add a link to our Congressional Toolkit. And what this includes, it includes any number of things. It includes the social media, like I mentioned, but also, you know, some tips. Some of it is a bit older from the beginning of the pandemic, but you know, the rest of it is still relevant, including the social media handles. So I'm going to add that to the chat function. But kind of, you know, Alex, I'm also going to, you know, send the question that I just asked Jenny to you as well. Why do you think the culinary community and chefs are, you know, reasonably well situated to, you know, help and support during this time?
I mean, I obviously agree with Jenny. I mean, she comes out of restaurants and she gets to work with them every day. I think that we have a natural inclination toward teamwork and caring for others, and it's how it's not just how we make a living. I think it's also how we nurture our own needs, is to be needed or to be taking care of others. It's something that we share, and then we have these relationships. We're very relationship driven, and I think when you that sort of makes us all people, even if, you know, we're not front of the house people, and that's the relationship that we're still people who choose to work with people and with food, which in most cases like plants and animals, right? And I think that those are like those touch points, like they really come into play when you're dealing with something that's really, it's hurting our landscape, like our urban landscape, our physical landscape, our ability to connect. And I think chefs are just drawn to that type of work. At least that's certainly, you know, true for me. And again, I think it expands our possibilities and our resolve when we get to like actually interact with people to resolve these problems. Natural problem solvers, we're always in a crisis. So this is like a crisis, you know, on top of a crisis, really. And I can tell you, yeah, during Sandy, we were the South, but we were also like that place where, you know, we had a backup generator in one of our locations, and it's the one that is operating in Chelsea right now doing these meals, and it's so it was so interesting to see, you know, who would come in there just to wash their hands and brush their teeth and say hello, and often they didn't need anything, and that was just not our function at that moment. Like, you are what people need you to be. You just show up for people.
Excellent. So I see some questions have come in. I'm not ignoring them. I'm saving them for the end. There's some great questions, but I wanted to remind everyone that if you do have a question, you know, we're going to start addressing those in just a few minutes here. So feel free to enter those in to that, you know, little question bar on the side. We will start getting to those soon. But Alex, I'm going to stick with you for just, you know, another moment before I ask everyone to, you know, think of some kind of final words. What advice or what insight would you give to other chefs or restaurants who are also looking at becoming part of some sort of nonprofit restaurant partnership doing community food?
I would say, first of all, like I said, it's great work, and it's work that's needed. So go for it. I think it's been incredibly satisfying. And then I would also say, depending on what type of restaurant you typically are, is get informed. You know, do your research, find out what the pricing of the packaging is. Try to find the best packaging you can. Unfortunately, a lot of these people need the possibility of reheating these meals, and so they've specifically asked us not to pack things in paper so that they can be oven ready or microwavable. So that is not always the most environmentally friendly choice. There are trade-offs involved. The packaging is quite costly, so make sure that you're building that into what you're doing. And then as all chefs know, it's not always how you sell, it's how you buy. And so, spend well, try to buy the stuff that has the most nutrition and is the best quality that you can get, and buy it in as large a quantity as you can, to take advantage of the savings that you can. I mean, I'm just thinking pragmatically how you can do this and actually and do it well, and make sure you're socially distancing as you're producing. I think cooks and chefs have a tendency to put their own health on the line to nourish others, and this is a good time to sort of just reinvent how you accomplish the task that you're doing minute by minute and day by day, because we're people who spend a lot of time together. So be smart about how you do it. And but I absolutely, I don't mean to be making people afraid to do it. It's great work, and it's satisfying, and it's even fun. It's very, it makes you more creative. It really sort of exercises your brain. And, yeah, it's great.
And Jenny,
And calming.
kind of calming.
I can tell you what I know about it. I might not be doing it as the best. But I would have loved to have been able to reach out to people to just get their best takes on where do I get the packaging, what does it cost, etc. These are good things to share.
And Jenny, kind of a similar question, but coming from the nonprofit perspective, from that other side of that nonprofit restaurant, nonprofit private partnership, what advice would you give to restaurants who are interested in getting involved with this?
Definitely what Alex was saying there at the end. Talk to some of the other folks who are engaged in this work. I'm delighted to connect people together. We've done quite a bit of that anyway. Even just if you're curious, and I think Alex makes a great point, there might be culinary professionals who were already in businesses that were using a lot of disposables, right, and have a line on a better rate for those. I think that there's probably alliances that can be built regionally to help keep expenses down. And just, where we started, the need is great and the need is real. In February, 1 in 7 kids in this country was at risk of hunger, and now it's probably 1 in 4. And I don't think that things are going to improve over the summer. So if you're inclined, get the information that you want. It's worthwhile work.
All right, and now I'm going to ask each of you, what is the number one thing you would like the attendees of this webinar to walk away with? It can be either a piece of information, it can be something you would like them to do, a call to action. And so Monica, starting with you, what's the number one thing you would like the attendees of this webinar to walk away with?
Definitely first, thank you all for what you're already doing on the ground. There's so much value in this public-private partnership. We've already seen this is not reinventing the wheel, it's just providing a new stream of revenue so that we can strengthen it. And please call your Congress members. We currently have 23 co-sponsors of the bill. We are still accepting co-sponsors, so call them and ask them to co-sponsor HR 6384 and express your support for the bill, because that would go a long way in getting us to the next steps.
Great, thank you. And if you're looking for information on your congressperson, it's in that chat, so you can locate them and also find their social media handles as well as their phone numbers, the phone numbers of their offices. So definitely please do that. Jenny, what would you like folks to take away?
I would want everyone to know that the need is real, the solutions are there, and your political action really does make a difference.
Great. And then finally, Alex, I'll let you close that out.
Well, ditto to Jenny, and thank you to Monica and Congresswoman Velázquez's office for getting this bill together and bringing together all of these experts. And to my colleagues out there, I would say not only encourage you to get involved, but I would also say it doesn't need to look the same for everyone. Everybody right now is trying to save a restaurant, and at the end of the day, that's not really saving the restaurant. I think what we've come to find out is it's really about saving these jobs for people that that rely on this work and that we all care deeply about, and their families. I always, I never thought I wouldn't have a job for someone. I always thought it was harder to fill the job than to create the work. And so I think, you know, get involved. We love this work, and we should all be doing it. I think that it can be a lifeline for restaurants to get through this time, and it's definitely a lifeline for cooks who don't have other options, and then also just work safely.
Thank you. So now we're going to go to some questions from the larger group, and there's still time to send those in if you have some. But I want to start with Patrick Mulvaney, a chef from Sacramento, California, who's been doing similar work out in his region, has graciously offered to share the operating procedures and training videos that they're using within their network. So if that's something you're interested in, reach out to us at the Beard Foundation, impact@jamesbeard.org, and I can also add that to the chat function. And we're happy to make those connections, send that information along. But Patrick, thank you for sharing that. And also I feel the need to add, he also says that chefs do this because they get shit done. So always appreciate that. So I think that this question is probably for Jenny and maybe also Monica, but I'm gonna, throw it out to the larger group. Simone was wondering how small, independently owned restaurants get funding for this sort of program. They have the skills, the willingness, and the ability. They just need access to that funding and support.
I'll go ahead and answer that one. So the way it would work is a community-based, a nonprofit would receive the grant up to $500,000, and then they would establish that partnership with the restaurant. So if you already have a working relationship with a nonprofit, that's amazing. If you don't, maybe now is a good time to reach out and just see what nonprofits are in your community. So if this bill is implemented, you already have that rapport established, and you can hopefully have that partnership go on forward when the funding from the bill is readily available.
Right, and I know that there are some national organizations that are partnering with restaurants off their plate, the Lee Initiative, but beyond that, I know that there are a lot of local organizations that are doing this. So, a local, area soup kitchen or other feeding operation. And Alex, I know you were saying that you're working with Brooklyn Cares, which is local. Is that correct?
It's a local self-funded little fund. I think that they have raised like $20,000. It's basically a crowdfunded fund, and then it's two moms, and one of them, they're both teachers, and one of them also is a sort of had been a physician in the past, a pediatrician, and so she has these connections to the front lines as well. And they wanted to do something in addition to their full-time job, and they put together this fund. And then I know that they've reached out to Good Fork and a couple of their other favorite restaurants, and we just feel lucky at Vara to be in this mom group community, and just thrilled what they called us, especially because it's a much smaller fund, but it was something that we were able to add on to the work that we were already doing. So it's also really nice to do some things that are really intimate and local, as well as, I feel like anything that we could add on, like if a neighbor even came to us and was like, I need a couple extra meals tonight. Once you're making 100 meals, it's much easier to scale to a point. So yeah, it's been very fulfilling.
Great, thank you. So looking at these national nonprofit organizations, but also, it sounds like a lot of community nonprofits are also doing this work. And the goal is that this bill would provide additional funding to help those nonprofits continue to do this work and to do it at a larger scale. So we had another question that came in that was kind of, along this lines, how can restaurants help their communities? I think, by participating in bills like this, by advocating for this bill, but also by supporting. Jenny, how can, and I don't know if you have any insight on this, how can a restaurant be a good partner to a nonprofit that's kind of working in this world?
I think, everything begins with conversation. And I think, Alex's point about it's how you spend is really well taken. We try and get into those with what are some of the needs that you have? Let's just hear them, because you might be surprised to find out that a restaurant could fill them. So there were some school districts we were engaging with that, because they were now preparing a larger volume of meals, just lacked the storage, the Lexans. So we were able to pivot and say to restaurant partners who were raising their hands, like, if your kitchen isn't functional right now, could we grab some Lexans out of it and move them over to, whatever the nonprofit might be. So really great conversations, offering up what you have and making sure they're really uncovering their needs to see where there might be a match that maybe doesn't even cost anyone anything.
Excellent. And so we had another question incoming from Joelle, who was wondering how their organization, I think Frontline Foods, how can these organizations that might already be working to feed frontline workers, I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on how they could expand that work, including frontline workers, but also to help those communities who have been most impacted. I know Jenny spoke a lot to helping feed school children, helping feed the elderly. How do folks who might already be working in this space expand to meet those communities' needs as well?
I mean, I would say that part of it, and Monica can reply to this as well, is engaging some of your local elected officials. So we know through our program colleagues and partners in New York City, right, there are still pockets that are harder hit around Corona and Jackson Heights, that area, other pocketed areas. Reach out to your elected officials and say, I have the capacity to help. I think that there are programs for frontline workers and there are programs for kids, but there aren't necessarily programs that focus on the other family members in those households. So, we know that where there's a hungry child, there's a hungry mom, a dad, a grandparent, and there's probably more need than we realize.
Right, and to Jenny's point, I know in New York City, they have launched the emergency food program where they are actively looking for providers to join this partnership and get food to where it's needed most. So definitely reaching out to your local elected city offices, city and state offices, seeing what initiatives are being put forth in your city so that you can be a part of the bigger change.
Thank you. And so I think we have a really great kind of final question to sort of wrap this up with. Mark from Roanoke, Virginia, who is working with nonprofits doing similar programs. So thank you, Mark, for contributing. That's amazing. And they have funding right now, but they're worried about keeping their funding going so that they're able to continue this work through the summer. And he's wondering, how do he restaurants, what can be done? And I think it's important to reiterate this for everyone on the call, what can be done to leverage this momentum that's happening to push this bill through, to make sure that these partnerships are able to continue to feed the people who need it most throughout the summer. And I think it's great if each of you could respond, but maybe Monica, I'll start with you.
Well, thank you. I think leveraging the message within your community, of course, so much happens just through word of mouth. And I can't imagine how many people that don't even know that this bill exists. And our goal is to make sure that everyone knows that it exists and everyone knows that there are members in Congress who are advocating for restaurants and nonprofits and that partnership to bolster security. So first, just continue to spread the word. That outreach is so imperative in moving this forward, highlighting the importance, just getting that conversation started that this is needed, not just now during this current crisis, but ongoing. If we ever have any future emergencies, natural disasters, we need a response that would respond to those. And this is one way that we can do that, establish those partnerships and make sure that we do have dedicated funding for these kind of events, and just keeping that conversation alive and letting people know there is already a bill that's like this, and it might not be the first of its kind. We would, of course, support all measures, but definitely just getting that message across that this exists. We need this now. We might need it in the future. We don't know. It's very, unplanned at this moment. But just keeping that conversation alive.
Great, thank you. And Jenny, what are your thoughts of how to keep this momentum going?
Just exactly the same. I think engaging with your local electeds, with your small business administration, advocating for someone in local government to be working with restaurants to help meet these community needs. And then we're helping the community anyway, because hopefully we're ensuring a few fewer folks will lose jobs and maybe have to avail themselves of these programs later.
Great. And finally, Alex, do you have any thoughts on how to keep the momentum going on this?
Well, I actually think it's going to be through relationships that are like undiscovered that have come out of this crisis. I think one of the most important things that's come out of these last moments of this discussion is this is just an opportunity that we have to create the types of not just safety nets, but the types of communities that we want to have going forward. And this is a challenge that we have right now. And based on what we know about just this virus, I don't think that anyone's ever going to, it's not going to be back to business as usual ever again. I think that it has showcased the vulnerabilities that even, people of privilege have. And so this is an opportunity that we have to create communities for ourselves and for our kids going forward. I don't think that this type of work is ever, I feel like I'm going to be doing this kind of work forever. It excites me, and I think that it's essential. And I'm so excited about this bill, and I'm also so excited that that I am going to seek out all of these nonprofits in my community, and even where I might have a restaurant that's too small to actually fulfill some of this work, or depending on the scale. I know that I have friends that I can point towards these different nonprofits, and then I also have friends in nonprofit who I can point towards this funding. And it's really, I think, going to be a very synergistic and a great way to move forward. And everyone's just looking for a way forward, I think.
Excellent, thank you. And I added a link to our chef sign-on letter to support the Community Meals Fund. This is done in partnership between the James Beard Foundation and Share Our Strength. We're really excited about it. We're really happy to be partnered with them. In support of this letter, we're asking chefs to sign on in support. That's all you need to do. All right now it takes is a little sign up. Whether or not you are participating in this meal fund, whether you're serving community meals yourself, everyone is welcome to sign on. And there's that link right there. Adding your voice to this really, really matters and is important. So if you haven't signed on already, I hope you follow that link and do sign on. It just takes a few moments. But it is now 3 p.m. So first off, thank you, everyone. Monica, Jenny, Alex, thank you for taking some time with us today to talk more about this really important piece of legislation. And thank you, everyone who joined from their homes or wherever you happen to join on your computer or phone. We will have more webinars next week. If you subscribe to our newsletter, we'll be sending out information on those webinars, as well as links to register tomorrow. That'll probably come out tomorrow afternoon or so. And like I said, you can always go back to our industry support webinar page where you can register for future webinars, but also we have our entire back catalog of past webinars. So feel free to peruse that. There's recordings of everything. There will be a recording of this webinar. So if there's anything you're interested in, you have access to all of that as well. And of course, it's all completely free. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And we hope that, if you're attending, we hope we'll see you next week. And thank you again, Alex, Jenny, and Monica.
Thank you.
Great to see you guys.
Thank you.